I never thought I'd be sitting across from federal investigators, explaining how the mentor I'd idolized for 15 years had betrayed not just me but potentially thousands of patients. But that's where this story ends. Let me take you back to where it began. My name is Marcus Evans, and for almost my entire adult life, I was a proud researcher at Pinnacle Pharmaceuticals. Victor Hammond wasn't just my boss. He was my hero. I was 27 when I joined his research team, fresh out of my PhD program, idealistic and eager to make a difference. Victor noticed me immediately. "You remind me of myself," he told me after I challenged one of his hypotheses during a team meeting. Most junior researchers wouldn't dare, but Victor valued intellectual honesty above hierarchy. That became our foundation. "Science serves humanity, not profit margins," was his mantra, repeated so often it became embedded in the culture of our labs. For years I watched him reject promising compounds because the side effect profiles weren't clean enough. "We don't compromise on safety," he'd say. "Not when lives are at stake." When he handed me the research director position 7 years ago, it felt like receiving a sacred trust. Victor was stepping back into a semi-retirement role on the board, but his principles remained our North Star. Our hypertension drug Presuclear was my greatest achievement, potentially life-changing medication for millions, including my own father, who'd struggled with dangerous blood pressure levels since I was a kid. The early clinical trials showed remarkable efficacy with minimal side effects. We were making medicine the right way, the way Victor had taught me. Until Dominic Reeves arrived. The company had been facing increased pressure from shareholders after 2 competitor drugs beat us to market. Lawrence Whitman, our CEO, brought Dominic in as Executive VP of Research and Development. Technically my superior, though everyone understood I ran the labs. "Just some fresh perspective," Lawrence assured me. "Nothing will change fundamentally." The changes were subtle at first. Questions about our timeline, suggestions to streamline the trial enrollment process, proposals to outsource some safety testing to a lab I didn't know. But during the Phase 2 results review, something shifted. I was presenting liver enzyme data that showed concerning elevations in about 8% of participants. Not dangerous yet, but a clear signal that warranted additional testing. "This is exactly the kind of perfectionism that's holding us back," Dominic interrupted, glancing at Lawrence for approval. "Other companies would have this drug on the market already." I looked to Victor, expecting him to defend our protocols as he always had. Instead, my mentor shifted uncomfortably in his chair, eyes fixed on his tablet. "Perhaps we could note the elevation as a potential concern for future monitoring rather than expanding the current testing protocol," he suggested quietly. That night, I couldn't sleep. Victor's words kept echoing in my mind. It wasn't just the content. It was the tone, conciliatory and uncertain, so unlike the confident mentor who had shaped my career. The next morning, I decided to review the raw data again, meticulously comparing patient results across different time points. What I found made my blood run cold. Someone had already altered the reporting parameters, marking several borderline liver results as within normal range when they clearly weren't. I printed the evidence and went straight to Victor's office. "Someone's manipulating the trial data," I said, laying the papers on his desk. Victor didn't look surprised. He looked tired. "The benchmarks were adjusted to industry standard parameters," he said carefully. "Marcus, you need to understand, the regulatory landscape is changing. Our competitors are working with these same frameworks." "This isn't about frameworks," I insisted. "This is about doctoring results. These numbers would trigger safety protocols if reported correctly." Victor removed his glasses, pinching the bridge of his nose. "The board has approved a more aggressive approach to our regulatory strategy. The landscape is competitive. Companies that don't adapt don't survive." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You taught me that patient safety comes before everything. Before profits. Before timelines. Before everything." "And it does," he said, but his eyes didn't meet mine. "But we need to be realistic about the degree of risk. Every medication has some level of risk." He placed his hand on the papers I'd brought. "I'll look into this. In the meantime, I suggest you focus on the Phase 3 preparations. Lawrence wants that timeline accelerated." I left his office feeling like I'd spoken to a stranger wearing my mentor's face. Over the next weeks, the pressure intensified. Dominic inserted himself into every aspect of the research process, questioning methodologies that had been our standard for years. Reports were edited after I'd signed off on them. Trial participants with concerning side effects were quietly removed from the study for, quote, protocol violations that seemed manufactured. I documented everything, building a separate file that I kept on an encrypted drive. I tried approaching Victor twice more, but he became increasingly distant, canceling our standing lunch meetings and redirecting my concerns to Dominic. Then came the board meeting that changed everything. I'd prepared a comprehensive presentation about the liver enzyme issues, bringing irrefutable evidence that the problem was significantly more widespread than reported in our FDA submissions. I never got to present it. Instead, Dominic opened the meeting with his own presentation. About me. Slides showing altered data, emails taken out of context, fabricated testimony from lab staff claiming I'd instructed them to modify results. It appears, Dominic said with simulated regret, that Dr. Evans has been manipulating trial data to cover up methodological flaws in the initial research design. Rather than acknowledge the errors and correct course, he attempted to hide them, potentially putting the entire approval process at risk. The room was silent. I looked at each face around the table. People I'd worked alongside for years, most wouldn't meet my eyes. Then I looked at Victor. "This is absurd," I said. "You know me. You know how I work. I would never falsify data." Victor cleared his throat. "The evidence is concerning, Marcus. At minimum, it suggests a troubling lack of oversight in your department." The betrayal knocked the wind from my lungs. 3 hours later, I was escorted from the building by security, my personal items in a box, my key card deactivated. "I trusted you," I said to Victor as the elevator doors began to close between us. "You taught me that integrity in research was everything." His response shattered my world. "Science changes, Marcus. So must we." The doors closed on 15 years of mentorship, respect, and what I had thought was friendship. Have you ever been betrayed by someone you deeply trusted? Someone who shaped who you are, only to reveal they no longer believe in the very principles they taught you? Share your experience in the comments below. Maybe together we can make sense of how the people we admire most can sometimes fail us so completely. The weeks that followed were the darkest of my life. The scientific community is smaller than most people realize. Within days, rumors about my quote professional misconduct circulated through Boston's biotech corridor. 3 job interviews were mysteriously canceled. Former colleagues crossed the street to avoid me. Eliza, my wife, tried to be supportive, but she couldn't fully grasp what I'd lost. "You'll find another position," she'd say. "Your work speaks for itself." She didn't understand that Dominic hadn't just taken my job. He'd poisoned my entire professional existence. Nights were the worst. I'd lie awake, replaying Victor's betrayal in my mind. After 15 years of mentorship, he'd chosen company profits over our shared principles, over patient safety. Over me. The man who had been like a second father to me couldn't even look me in the eye while they destroyed my career. My medical research license was placed under review based on Pinnacle's allegations. Our savings began to dwindle. I started having panic attacks. The weight of the injustice was crushing, but even more oppressive was the helplessness. What could one person do against a pharmaceutical giant with billions in resources and armies of lawyers? One evening, as I sat staring at my father's medication bottles on our kitchen counter, my phone buzzed with an unexpected text from Sophia Chen, one of my former lab technicians. "They're pushing Presu clear through. Final FDA submission next month. The liver data is gone. Can we talk? Somewhere safe." We met at a coffee shop 30 miles outside Boston. Sophia was nervous, constantly checking the door. "They completely rewrote the safety sections after you left," she whispered. Raj and I tried to object, but they threatened our careers. Emma's going along with it. "She's too junior to risk her position." "But people could die, Dr. Evans. The numbers we're seeing in the extended trials, they're worse than before." She slid a USB drive across the table. "I made copies of the original datasets. I don't know if it helps, but I couldn't be part of this without doing something." That USB drive was the first piece of what would become my case. Through an industry contact, I connected with Dr. Nathan Thorne, who had been terminated from Pinnacle's oncology division the previous year under strikingly similar circumstances. "They're using the same playbook," he confirmed when we met. "Bring in a hatchet man like Dominic, push out anyone who won't play ball, manipulate the data, rush to market. When the inevitable problems surface, they have their scapegoats already lined up." Nathan had his own evidence, documents showing a pattern of data manipulation across multiple drug trials and divisions. A systematic corporate conspiracy prioritizing profits over patient safety. With evidence from Nathan and testimony from Sophia and eventually Raj, who found the courage to come forward, I faced a crucial decision. The day I decided to become a whistleblower wasn't about revenge. It was about remembering who I was, who Victor had taught me to be before he lost his way. Nathan asked if I understood the cost. They'll try to destroy what's left of your reputation. I looked at my father's medication bottles on my desk, thinking about how easily he, and countless patients like him, could soon be prescribed a medication with hidden dangers. Some prices are worth paying, I said, reaching for my phone to make the call that would change everything. If you're facing a moral crossroads like I was, remember that speaking truth to power is rarely easy, but living with silence can be harder. I'd love to hear your stories of difficult ethical decisions in the comments. The FDA's Office of Criminal Investigations moved with surprising speed once they saw our evidence. They had apparently already had Pinnacle on their radar, due to irregularities in their reporting patterns. My attorney helped me prepare a comprehensive whistleblower filing under the False Claims Act, detailing every instance of data manipulation we could document. For 3 months we worked in secret with federal investigators, gathering additional evidence, connecting patterns across multiple drug applications. I lived in a constant state of anxiety, jumping at unexpected knocks, checking for surveillance. Eliza worried about my mental health, but stood by me without question. "I married a man of principle," she said. "I wouldn't have it any other way." The FDA investigation culminated in a dramatic raid of Pinnacle's headquarters during an investor meeting where Lawrence was announcing the expected approval timeline for Pressue Clear. I wasn't there, but Raj described it later. Federal agents entering the boardroom, the shock on everyone's faces as computers were seized and documents confiscated. Dominic's face had drained of color, Raj said, while Lawrence immediately called for legal counsel. And Victor, my once revered mentor, reportedly stood in the corner, suddenly looking old and small. The evidence resulted in criminal indictments against Dominic, Lawrence, and several board members for fraud, concealing information from regulatory authorities, and reckless endangerment. The company's stock plummeted. Class action lawsuits were filed. Victor wasn't charged due to his cooperation with authorities, but he resigned in disgrace. 3 weeks after the indictments were announced, he called me. "I compromised," he said, his voice sounding hollow. "Small compromises at first, timelines, procedural adjustments, then bigger ones, each justified by market pressures, competitive necessity. I told myself it was for the company's survival, for the greater good of all the other medications we might develop." "You taught me better," I said simply. "I know." A long pause followed. "I'm proud of you, Marcus, for being stronger than I was." I couldn't bring myself to offer forgiveness, but in that moment, I found something more valuable: freedom from needing his approval. Some betrayals change you forever, but not always for the worse. They reveal who you truly are when everything else is stripped away. The aftermath was both vindicating and bittersweet. My name was cleared. The medical board dismissed all allegations against me. Major news outlets covered the story, casting me as a heroic whistleblower who had potentially saved thousands of lives. Pinnacle, under new leadership, offered to reinstate me with a substantial raise. I declined. Instead, I accepted a position with the FDA's Drug Safety Division, where I could apply my experience to protect patients on a broader scale, reviewing the very kinds of manipulated submissions I had exposed. Eliza supported the career change completely, even though it meant a significant pay cut from my previous pharmaceutical salary. "You've never looked happier," she observed a few months into my new role. She was right. There's a particular kind of peace that comes from aligning your actions with your deepest values, even after being forced to recognize that others may not share them, even those you most admired. I still think of Victor sometimes, wondering where his moral compass began to falter. Was it gradual, a series of small compromises that became easier each time? Or was there a defining moment when he consciously chose to abandon principles for practicality? I'll probably never know. What I do know is that mentor figures are human, fallible, and complex. The principles they teach us may eventually become weapons we must wield against them when they stray from their own path. If you've found the strength to stand up against corruption or betrayal, especially from someone you once looked up to, I'd love to hear your story in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please consider subscribing to hear more journeys of personal triumph over betrayal. The last time I saw Victor was at a bioethics conference 6 months ago. He's working now as a consultant on research ethics, ironically enough, perhaps seeking redemption through teaching others to avoid his mistakes. We nodded to each other across the room but didn't speak. I felt neither anger nor affection, just a quiet acknowledgement of our shared history and divergent paths. The session I was attending focused on moral courage in scientific research. As I listened to the speaker discuss the personal costs of ethical stands, I thought about the chain of mentorship, how Victor had shaped me, and how I now mentor young FDA reviewers, emphasizing the principles he once taught me. Sometimes our greatest teachers show us who to become, sometimes they show us who not to become. Either way, the lesson shapes us. When I returned home that evening, my father was visiting for dinner. He's doing well on a new hypertension medication, not Clear, which never made it to market. As he helped me wash dishes afterward, he said, I've never properly thanked you." "For what?" I asked. "For risking everything to do the right thing. I raised you to have integrity, but it's one thing to talk about principles, another to stand by them when it costs you everything." I looked at my father, my first and most important mentor, and felt the circle complete. "I had good examples," I said. And I realized then that while betrayal breaks something irreparably, it also creates space for something new to grow. Every story of betrayal is also potentially a story of rebuilding, finding new foundations, new trustworthy people, and perhaps most importantly, a stronger trust in yourself and your own moral compass. So if you're in that dark place now, weathering the storm of betrayal, know that the pain eventually transforms into something valuable: discernment, resilience, and a deeper understanding of who you truly are. Sometimes the people we trust most fail us in fundamental ways, but in standing firm while they fall, we discover strengths we never knew we possessed. If this story touched you or reflected something in your own experience, please consider sharing it with someone who might need to hear that standing alone for what's right is worth the cost. And remember that no matter how isolated you might feel in your ethical stand, you're never truly alone. There are always others who will eventually recognize and stand with the truth.